Testing. Testing sound. All right, that's fine. All right. We're 3 minutes early, but there's at least one person in the room, so I'm down to get started. Got nothing else to do. I'm all set up. I would love to talk about whatever, really. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised or disappointed if only one or two people show up. This is just an experiment. I was kind of prepared for the possibility that maybe my audience just isn't really into this type of hangout. People are probably busy. People might just want to support and not really do things like hang out. So just thought it'd be worth trying. I'm game for it if other people are. Even if it's only a few people, it's fine by me. What's up, Caleb? What's going on with you? Are you like at work right now or unemployed or chilling at home? Sneaking off to the water cooler or something? Hang on one sec. Yeah, nothing. What's up, nothing? Good to see you. Yeah, people do work at this time, but there's actually data and some research on when is the best time to do online group interactive stuff. And actually, it turns out that about this time is one of the times that gets the most response rates. The best response rates. So yeah, I mean, it's when you have a global audience, it's basically an impossible task to find a time that is really good for everyone. You have to just kind of accept that some people aren't going to be able to do it. But yeah, Caleb says you're in the freelance limbo hell of graphic design. Oh, okay. Yeah. Just chilling. Okay, that's cool. Why do you say it's limbo hell? Like in between work, it's hard to get work. Sometimes you have slow periods. Is that what you mean? Yeah, I've heard it's a bit of a grind getting work as a freelancer. I guess I'm kind of starting to dabble in that, so I have some experience with it. I'm doing some freelance work, but I'm not really like aggressively seeking it out, and I'm kind of like okay for the moment, so I'm not really stressed by it. But yeah, I would imagine if that was full time, that would be hard. I mean, what would about people not being able to make this time? Like, a lot of people work jobs where when they're at work, it's actually not that demanding, or rather, what I should say is it's flexible so that for a lot of people, you can kind of sneak if you put your headphones in, you can sneak if you're just typing and watching, you can actually passively participate in a live stream hangout like this at work. Some people can, of course, not everyone. Okay, nothing says that you've been working in the medical field and made you go crazy, so you went back to school. Cool, right on. What are you going to school for? Oh, so you can hang out and spend time on your creative output. That's awesome. Yeah. So what are you going to school for, or what are you working on? You were part of a medical team. You don't want to dox yourself. That's fine. I understand. No worries. No pressure. Uh, Started a degree in math. Cool. Caleb says it's hard to find new clients, and it's also difficult for me to structure myself. I think I actually prefer working full time with others. Yeah, definitely pros and cons there. All right, we got a question. I'll take it. Caleb asks, Justin, I have a question about religion I've been sitting on. If you're down to chat about that at any point, shoot, let's hear your question on religion. Nothing says that you're getting into translation, so you'll double major in languages and math. Well, that's pretty cool. What languages do you translate? Nothing. I've long had a really interesting idea about translations and like publishing. I mean, it's not too novel or original, but I'll just say it real quick. Uh, I don't know if you guys follow this, but a lot of books are coming out in public domain that haven't traditionally been in public domain. Actually, even just yesterday, there was an article that came out that apparently about 80% of books published before 1963, they failed to renew their copyright, which they needed to do if they wanted to keep that copyright prolonged over time. So actually 80% of books published before 1963 are in the public domain. And people don't even know this. People didn't even know this. People still don't know it. Just like an article came out recently that kind of shows this to be the case. And there's now a small group of people kind of cataloging which of these books are public domain. But this is huge if you're interested in kind of independent intellectual stuff like publishing and whatever. It's actually really interesting and kind of exciting to me because what I'm kind of thinking about is finding cool books that I like or love, perhaps even some that I know of that I've read and that mean a lot to me or whatever, that are written in that time period that are in the public domain. And maybe like currently on Amazon, the best available copy of that book is like 25 bucks or something like that, which you often find. Or perhaps there's good obscure books out there that aren't even published on Amazon or otherwise. And you can literally just, if you just get the text, you can basically copy and paste it into a text file, do some minimal cleanup, and publish it under your own like publishing house or whatever, and post it to Amazon. And not only are you like bringing to market like an awesome physical book that you want to bring into the world, but possibly make a little bit of money off of it too. So I think there's like a huge opening right now for this if people wanted to do it. And I'm thinking about kind of starting to look into it. I haven't yet, but the reason I think of this in connection to you, nothing, is that translation, is also kind of in this boat. If you could find old texts that are in the public domain that haven't been translated yet. I mean, traditionally, a lot of translators work for people, they get paid by publishers, but you could feasibly think about finding good old texts in the public domain, translating them and publishing them. And yeah, doing it all yourself and making money directly. It's just a thought. I don't know how feasible this stuff is, but I definitely think there's opportunities there. All right, so let's take yeah, Oreo would be easy to outsource. That's right, Tim. What's up, Tim? Welcome. And let's see what else. Nothing says that my plan is to work for people working to automate translation. Yeah, definitely. Spanish and Portuguese, cool. Uh, awesome. All right, so I'm gonna take Caleb's question, but people should feel free to raise other questions or comments, and I'll try to address them all or mention them all. So long as there's only like a few people in the chat, like there is right now, I can pretty much address everything. Hopefully. All right. So Caleb Miller says, maybe I misunderstand religion here, but bear with me. All right. Is it more important to try and practice a religion or just any system of making meaning for that matter that has a structure and rhetoric that resonates with you? Or instead, should you try and make something positive personal out of the predominant religion of your environment so that you can better relate to your peers and neighbors? Okay, that's an interesting framing of the question. I'll just give you my 2 cents. Obviously, religion is a super personal feature of life. So I'm not going to, proselytize too hard for any particular attitude. I mean, I have some strong beliefs and I will express them strongly, but I'm not really interested in proselytizing simply because I think it backfires. People don't want to, especially in today's day and age, people don't want to be told what to think. And if they sense that that's happening at all, that they often kind of just shrivel up and stop listening. But here's what I'll say to the first part of your question. I would say no. I think that's a bad path. The first part of the question being, you know, is it good to try and practice a religion that has a structure and rhetoric that resonates with you? I don't think it should work like that. I don't think you should go shopping for religions. I think that's essentially a kind of very modern, individualistic, consumer type of mentality. So that's my intuition on that. I would say a strong no to just choosing religions that resonate with you. What I would say is that you should only choose a religion or adopt a religion or believe in a religion if you think that it is true. You should search for what is true in all things. That's my attitude anyway. In philosophy, in art, in science, and in kind of the spiritual questions of life, in all domains. Seek what is true as radically as you can, I think. And that pretty much will sort you out. Although it will look very differently and it will manifest very differently in those different domains. That's how I see it anyway. So when it comes to religion, if you're interested in religion, if you find yourself drawn to religions, then just read about them, study about them, think about them, and just follow what seems true. That's my only kind of ultimate rule of thumb when it comes to these things. So, however, the second part of your question, Caleb, I think is a good one, where you say, should you try and make something positive or personal out of the predominant religion of your environment so that you can better relate to your peers, neighbors? There's a kernel of wisdom in there, I think. The last bit of that question, I think I would reject, where you say, in order to better relate to your peers and neighbors. Again, I don't think you should ever pursue religion with these kinds of instrumental motivations. I think, especially in religion, instrumental motivations, by which I mean, the desire to maximize or optimize some sort of end goal, should never be the motivation. And if you find yourself thinking with that type of structure where you're trying to choose a religious attitude or a religious practice or something like that to optimize something else, you're probably down the wrong path. That is quintessential kind of modern, exploitative, capitalistic thinking, and it's essentially from its core sending you down a path that is essentially the opposite of true religion. I think. I think true religion is pretty much evolved to be the exact opposite of instrumental rationality. It's a kind of individualized but also collectivized it works on multiple levels, a kind of system for preventing the generalization of instrumental rationality, which capitalism essentially is. So, yeah, that would be another rule of thumb. Never think instrumentally when it comes to religion. However, there are instrumental benefits to religion, no doubt. There's a lot of research on this. Good things do happen from it. Good things do come from it. Not in a kind of mystical, supernatural way, but in a basic kind of social scientific sense of the effects that it has on one and one's community. So you can enjoy those beneficial effects. And also, I would say that those beneficial effects of a religious devotion are, in some sense, a kind of evidence for the the claims of religion. It's just crucial for you or for anyone pursuing, the truth of religion to not be motivated by those things. It's kind of an ironic or paradoxical structure here that you only really get the beneficial consequences if you radically forego instrumental rationality. It's kind of ironic and interesting, isn't it? If you are getting into religion just for the instrumental benefits, it won't work, in other words. It won't be real. You won't really click into it in the way that produces the instrumental benefits. So it's a fascinating and kind of miraculous kind of structure there, but that seems to be a real structure. So that's my 2 cents on that. I would also say one other thing on this question about whether you should try to make something positive out of the predominant religion of your environment. Again, I wouldn't choose a religion simply on the grounds that like your mother and father think it and it would be beneficial socially and in your family to adopt it or something so simple and vulgar as that. However, there is a kernel of truth to that, I think, if one is being honest. So for instance, like I'm a Catholic and I just have to admit, I think you have to admit that religious devotion or the decision about which religion one invests in is to some degree a function of what you were born into. I mean, I think Catholicism is true, and I wouldn't believe it if I didn't think it was true. But would I believe it? Would I be a Catholic if I wasn't born into a Catholic family and went to Sunday school and was brought up to be confirmed and all of that? Uh, that's a difficult empirical question. I mean, you have to figure that statistically. I probably wouldn't, or I'd be much less likely. So there is an empirical reality there, and I would say also that there is something good there too. I think I don't know. I don't have a strong answer to this question. I haven't thought about it enough, but I think there is something to be said in favor of if you don't know how you feel about religion, if you don't know where to go or what to pursue, but you do feel drawn to religion. I do want to say that there's something that makes sense about just starting with whatever is nearest to you culturally. I think as long as you're pursuing the truth and you're not just being kind of like chauvinist about, this is my culture, this is what I was born into, therefore I'm devoted to it and I'm going to fight for it or something like that. I think that kind of naive, tribalistic attitude is not right. However, as a starting point, I think there are I think it's quite natural and quite fine. And there's something good about affirming the chance occurrences that led you to be who you are. I think that's a very Nietzschean and very Deleuzian attitude towards life, which is a very affirmative attitude towards life, which I definitely tend toward. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer because I don't really know, but I'm just kind of giving you my intuitions off the cuff. All right, what do you think of that? Anyone? Any comments or other questions? Caleb says, "Well said." That, and then I can air utilitarian. You say, okay, good. Glad you find that at all interesting or useful. Nothing says I don't want to be preachy. All I'm saying is you can't get into heaven without Jesus Christ. Norm McDonald. Um, okay. Nothing says Catholic scholastics and Jewish midrash are huge fountains of wisdom, and you can take it in without accepting any dogmas. Yeah, I kind of think that. I mean, I wrote this blog post recently about the meaning of the word God, and I did a video on it also. And I got a lot of pushback, I guess, by Catholic people who were saying like that's heretical. And there were some good points made, and I get it. But I agree with what Nothing says that, you know, you can be Catholic essentially without. Um, here's what I would say. I accept the dogmas of the Catholic Church because I believe in Catholicism. So I'm willing to say that I accept the dogmas and I respect the dogmas. Here's the rub though. The question is, what do the dogmas mean? That's essentially an interpretive challenge. And as we all know, the interpretation of scriptures or the interpretation of anything really is difficult and always unclear. And it's always in a process of contestation. So I'm kind of a formalist in the sense that I will affirm all of the dogmas of the Catholic Church formally, but then I will try to think them through and I will try to explain them to myself and to others in the only way I know how, which is in my own theory, my own understanding, my own language. And so I think that's fair play. If people don't like my interpretations, that's fine and they should criticize them. And I'm genuinely interested to always be kind of thinking them through in good faith. And I think that is essentially the process of, you know, theological history. I think the key thing is just that you affirm the dogmas explicitly and formally as to what they mean. That's for us to all figure out over time. And it's not like I'm saying that we have the right to interpret scripture however we want or something like that. I'm not pushing for a kind of like Protestantism in that regard because I am saying that I affirm the dogmas. I'm pointing to a kind of irreducible fact of language, really. And I think that's the difference. Like the Protestant inclination is to say that we get to decide what are the dogmas. Essentially, we get to decide from the ground up, and that I think is wrong. I think you do have to submit. If you're a Christian, you have to submit to the historical reality that Christianity is, and that is the Catholic Church. And none of it makes any sense to me if you're not submitting to a kind of continuous historical authoritarian spiritual structure that is the one linked to the revolution that was Christianity. So that's how I think about it. Yeah, so Tim asks, do you believe in Catholic dogma such as transubstantiation? For those of you who might not know this, I'll just give you a quick summary of that. Transubstantiation is the dogma that in the Eucharist, also known as communion, in the sacrament of the Eucharist, when people put the little wafer in their mouth, that wafer is not just a wafer. In fact, it's not a wafer at all. The theory of transubstantiation is that the wine you drink in that sacrament and the wafer that you eat in that sacrament is literally the body and blood of Christ. That's the dogma of transubstantiation, that in the sacramental ceremony of a legitimate priest, in that sacramental ceremony, an actual wafer and an actual glass of wine transforms not metaphorically, but actually, literally, into the blood and into the blood and body of Christ. That's the idea of transubstantiation. So the question is, do I believe in transubstantiation? Well, that's a really good question. And I would say exactly what I said before. I submit to the dogmas of the Catholic Church. So yes, I believe in transubstantiation. I'm willing to affirm that dogma. I'm also reasonable enough to see that it sounds absolutely bonkers and makes no sense from a scientific or rational perspective. And yet I'm also a rationalist, so willing to I'm not willing to say that I believe in things that don't make sense. What I would say, or what I would do, is think about transubstantiation in a way that makes sense, that is rational. And whatever that way is my understanding of transubstantiation. So in other words, I kind of see religion as this like intellectual challenge, really. You start by affirming the dogmas, whatever they are, and they're not, it's okay if they don't make sense. They're kind of not supposed to make sense at first. That's the whole point of belief. That's why it's good. That's why it's faith, right? If it made perfect sense, then it wouldn't be faith to believe in it. So the church has these dogmas that don't make a lot of sense at first, but for other reasons, like all of my data about the world and myself and the nature of life, all of that data suggests to me that this kind of Catholic system is true and is worthy of my submission. So on faith, I take it for granted that the dogmas are true statements, even if they make no sense to me. That's humility. That's me saying, okay, if the transubstantiation sounds stupid, or it sounds like it makes no sense whatsoever, like it's just a totally bonkers supernatural idea, if that's what it sounds like, well, maybe that's because I'm stupid or limited in some way that I don't fully understand. Perhaps there is a understanding of that transubstantiation dogma that in fact makes perfect sense and is true and is rational and is perfectly consistent with all other ways of confirming or disconfirming reality. That's my attitude. And so then a religious life becomes all about trying to figure out those mysteries. It's trying to figure it out. So the challenge becomes, if transubstantiation is true and yet it sounds crazy, well, then how is it true? How does it make sense? And just being a good Catholic means living a life where you're dedicated to trying to figure that out, honestly. And that's my attitude towards it. And that's kind of how I square the seeming irrationality of religion and Catholicism with essentially a modern rationalist kind of scientific attitude, which I'm not willing to let go. I'm not willing to, I'm just not willing to. So I think that's how you do it, through the process of a lifelong search, of a lifelong trying to figure it out. Wrestling with God is believing in God. It's not like just some kind of naive, simple, one fine day you kind of just are willing to believe in a whole bunch of supernatural stuff that doesn't make sense. I don't think that's actually an authentic religious attitude or religious life. I think that's actually a kind of cop out. That's I would almost say that is heretical. I think because you're essentially skipping over genuine mental puzzles, just trying to write them off by a kind of arbitrary decree that, okay, everything I'm supposed to believe according to the church is true, and you just kind of pretend that you understand it all of a sudden. Well, they're mysteries. You're not supposed to understand them exactly, and to just write it all off as simple and straightforward is, I think, itself a kind of um, a kind of betrayal of precisely what the religious life involves. What's up, Rob Walker? Welcome. We got 5 people in the house. That's cool. Who's here? Everyone here say hi. Do we have everyone? Is it just Tim, Nothing, Rob Walker, and Caleb? Is that everyone? What else is going on? Or what else do you want to talk about? Tell me about you all. Tell me about your lives, your hopes, fears, and dreams. Parker Roove, is that how you pronounce it? What's up, dude? Rob, you said that Jeffrey blocked you. Why were you giving him shit? think he might. I think he might be a fairly avid blocker. I'm not sure. If you were being mean, well, okay. I don't feel too bad for you then. If you cared, I could. I'm sure I could get him to unblock you, but you probably don't care. What was he saying that you gave him shit for? Tim asks, "Are you interested in doing something commercial with the Google data consulting?" Hell yeah, I'm open to doing things commercial. I'm very open. Obviously, it depends on the idea, it depends on the project, but yeah. Parker says, "I'm one of the kids shitting up your Discord with doomer discourse." It's okay. I don't think you're. I don't think you're shitting it up, or at least I haven't noticed it. Have people been telling you that you're shitting up the Discord? Tim says, "Let's talk about it." All right, man. Shoot me an email, or I'll shoot you an email after this. Rob says that libertarianism is an excuse, justification, or rationalization for cuckoldry. uh, yeah, there's some tension there for sure. I see what you're thinking. Oh, we got Duncan Cooper in the house. What's up, Duncan? Oh, that's Brand Van. Brand Van 4K, is it? Awesome. It would be great if I kind of wish people had the same usernames for YouTube and Discord. It would make it so much easier to like remember people. Obviously, not how things work, but Parker, what did you say that in the Discord that people didn't like? What did you get shit for? Rob says that he tried to be consistent online with his identities and then got sacked. Yeah, that is the problem. That's one drawback. But you could have pseudonymous identities that are consistent, right? Parker says there was a post about a bunch of kids trashing a Walgreens. I thought it was okay and kind of funny. Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, I'm generally in favor of um, rambunctiousness among the youth. I feel like it's very, very suppressed to a dangerous degree, actually. Rob is Bronze Age pervert, says Duncan Cooper. Maybe. I don't know. All right, we got 6 people in the house. It's pretty good. I was prepared for maybe only a few people coming out. Wasn't sure if this is something people would want to do. So I'm glad. This is fun. It's nice doing a live stream where it's like not all the pressure of public, you know? I feel just kind of like hanging out with friends. It's a little more relaxed. I'm not too concerned about how I look or sound. So that's kind of nice. Duncan asked, "Did I miss a life update?" Nope, you didn't miss anything. You missed a little bit of a speech I gave on religion and how to think about choosing a religion, which I kind of rejected the idea of choosing a religion. I think you should never really think like that. So I kind of explained that, and then I explained a little bit about how it's possible to believe in seemingly ridiculous dogmas like transubstantiation, for instance. I kind of explained how I can affirm those dogmas without kind of submitting to a kind of irrational or supernatural worldview. So that's all you missed substantively, and then just some chit chat. But would you like an update? If you'd like some kind of life update, just ask, and tell me a little bit about what you'd want me to update you on. Happy to tell you what. I'm happy to tell you folks basically anything. I don't really pull any punches, so yeah, don't hesitate. Yeah, Caleb says let the kids wild. I completely agree. I mean, I think it's probably one of the background factors for why we have these mass shootings in the 1970s, for instance, as late as the 1970s, young men were fairly free to be pretty fucking wild. Like if you watch movies from the 1970s, I've been watching all these movies from the 1970s, and there's just like totally different types of people, especially with respect to young men. I watched a movie based on the book by S.E. Hinton called The Outsiders. Have any of you read that? It was made in the 70s. It's set in the 50s, I think, or 60s, but it's made in the 70s. And look, for all of history, young men, a good portion of young men, at least a non-trivial portion of young men, need to get in a lot of trouble when they're young in their teenage years. They need to fight and they need to be wild, and it's just like a biological fact of human species, I think, in some sense. And yeah, they can do some dangerous stuff, and we should try to minimize that, but not kind of snuff out the basic human propensity of young men to test themselves and to assert themselves. But I think what's happened is that it's been so strongly snuffed out that it kind of rears its ugly head in these like insane bursts of murder in some sense. So like in if you watch the movie on the movie of the Outsiders book, it's you just see interesting things from movies in the 70s, like Matt Dillon, young Matt Dillon, plays this character who's like a real badass young boy, and he's like he's out in the West. I forget where exactly. And at some point in the movie, he's like 17 or something like that. At some point in the movie, it comes up that he like ditched a murder charge in New York. So he like got wrapped up in some kind of murder situation and fled New York for the West. And he's just kind of living like a badass single man, young man, 17 years old in the West. And you see things like that in movies from the 70s, and you're like, oh, this just literally doesn't happen anymore. It has many factors behind it, right? One is just the increasing power of the state, surveillance, technology, stuff like that. Law enforcement is way more sophisticated than it used to be. So if you murder someone in New York as a 17-year-old, you can't really get away with it by like just going to California or something like that. But in the 70s, you still could. People don't realize that. It was not that long ago that you could kind of get away with that kind of shit. And you might say that's horrible, that's terrible, right? Because, well, he killed someone in New York. He should not, this is terrifying. We should try to prevent people like that from fleeing the state and getting away with it. But now we have all these mass shooters. So you could make the argument that actually it would be better if a small minority of, violent, aggressive young men could murder one person in their life and get away with it, rather than kill, have less men doing that. But when they do it, they kill like 50 at a time in this kind of like high profile national, panic event. I don't know which is better. All I'm saying is I think there's a process going on here that almost no one is talking about because people forget these things. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and yeah, I don't have a very coherent or compelling story about it, like a theoretical story, but I definitely think something like that is going on, where these are kind of extremely bad blow-ups of what should be actually more natural and socially permitted kind of like biological functions. And if they were less rigorously prohibited, then when they do rear their heads, they wouldn't be so insanely horrific. I don't know if that's true. So I'm not exactly saying we should let teenage boys get in fights and accidentally kill each other every now and then, but I think it's a really good question. All right, let's see what we got. All right, some good stories from Tim, who grew up in the 70s. When I was 9, my friends and I would take out my canoe for the whole day, and it was normal. No parents. Tim says, we all played baseball, the athletes and non-athletes together. No parents, no league, no specialized teams. It didn't matter. Some kids sucked. Boy Scouts destroyed it. Um, so yeah, I mean, what's interesting. Okay, what's interesting is that these things that Tim described. Oh, Tim says, no, I'm saying Boy Scouts has been destroyed on the altar of feminism. Oh, I see. Boy Scouts used to be badass. Yeah, I know what you mean. Now it's kind of weak. Um, so here's something else I would say. Even as late as my generation, I enjoyed a fairly free childhood. My parents let me to do most of the things that Tim cites about the 70s. Like I also like we used to play football every Sunday in the neighborhood when I was like, 8 years old or something like that, quite young. And my parents let me go out for the whole day to play as a very, very young boy. And I think I was all the better for it, no doubt. And so you do still, at least as late as my generation, you still had that kind of freedom found somewhere. What's really different that I think has been snuffed out even before my generation is stuff like hitchhiking, stuff like bar fights, stuff like that. Um, those things used to be much more common for teenage men, driving fast cars, crashing them, stuff like that. Those things I think were common features of teenage male life as late as the 70s is my sense of things. I mean, I'm not like an extremely well-read cultural historian, but I've been interested in this kind of observation for a long time, so I have been kind of collecting observations. And you see it especially clearly in movies. I'm not taking movies for reality, but movies do reflect these things in some sense. So those are all things that my dad experienced in his life. And my dad's not an especially, crazy guy. He's probably like average. He's pretty average in his kind of temperament, I think. Um, and those are things that my dad experienced. And, maybe they weren't super common in the 70s and 60s and before, but these types of things were not unheard of. Now they're essentially unheard of. So, I never, ever would have thought of running away from home in my teenage years and hitchhiking, for instance. That's something that like my dad did. Um, Stuff like that. And I think those are the types of data points that reflect probably like they can be pathological, but they reflect uh, deep and essentially uh, okay kind of young male tendencies that have to be given just enough like breathing space. Do you know what I mean? So that they don't um, fester and swell up into like outrageous, horrific acts of kind of mass violence. So, yeah, I think there are also a lot of other implications, like, um, yeah, but I'll maybe save that for another comment. Let's see what other people are saying. Yeah, Tim says my dad literally taught me how to fight. Spent 20 hours on it. Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, I don't think many I don't think many fathers would teach their sons how to fight. And also a lot of young boys now don't like they're not even interested in these things. And so I think what's actually happening is you have this kind of bimodal outcome where young boys either become increasingly effeminate and kind of, quote unquote beta or whatever. And they kind of just from a very young age, they kind of submit to having like all their masculine tendencies subdued and they kind of allow their identity and you know, energy to be organized around that submission. And some people can do that, right? Some young men have the temperament and constitution to acculturate themselves to that new normal. And even some men excel at it. And that's why you see people like, I don't know, someone like Justin Trudeau is kind of like, to me, an emblem of this, you know, able to really strategically submit to a kind of effeminate culture and to actually excel in doing so, able to rise to the top of politics and power and all of that, through a kind of cultivated emasculation in some sense. That's one set of social outcomes on the one hand. But then there's the young men who aren't able to do that, right? And they are basically social problems from the youngest age, right? They're not able to sit still in class in, like first grade. And from then on, they're immediately kind of tracked into this identity as like a problem child. And, Kantbot doesn't write that much, or at least he hasn't written that much that I've read or that really like mattered to me. But he did write this one piece called I forget exactly the title. Some of you might know it. Put the title in the chat if you know it. But it's something like guns don't cause school shootings. School psychologists do. And I think it's a really good article. I don't agree with all of the empirical statements, but the gist of it, I think, is very much needed, and it's a really really good point. When these mass shootings happen, we all kind of wring our hands and cry at the horror of it all. But really, like these things, these people who do these shootings, um, they're they're produced through years and years of a very very sick and abusive social culture, in particular in public schooling. So yeah, I mean these kids are generally tortured, or these young men, often do have torturous childhoods, uh, tortured that is at the hands of essentially public institutions such as the school system. So I thought Kantbot's article on that uh, is a really necessary kind of antidote. Of course, you know this type of perspective has almost no traction in the public discourse, but I think it's really true, and I think we're probably going to have more and more of these mass shootings until we somehow have a totally revolutionized kind of early childhood and even mid childhood kind of like socialization process for um, you know neurodivergent young men or aggressively inclined young men. I think until we think about that, until we think about those types of kids honestly and constructively, and like significantly overhaul the experience of childhood for these young men, mass shootings are probably going to keep increasing, uh, or at least they're not going to go away. Would be my sense. But the sad thing is, I don't see any political mobilization, even potentially, for that type of overhaul, especially given the types of explanations that the dominant commentators want to impose on these events. So yeah, I'm kind of braced for more and more shootings. Honestly, it was kind of this last one in Walmart was kind of scary for me because El Paso is not actually very far from Albuquerque, and I shop at the Walmart here. Like that's where I go. That's where we get food. Um, and Yeah, it's definitely getting kind of scary. I think the reason people are kind of getting increasingly panicky and stupid about it is because they're starting to really feel like afraid personally for themselves. All right, let's see what we've got in the chat. Parker says, one of my friends went out and shot up a bunch of car windows with a BB gun as a youthful, iconoclastic gesture. It wasn't meant as a rebellion against car culture, but I think it could constitute that. Yeah, I used to do senseless, rebellious stuff all the time. Definitely. Generally never hurt anyone. It could have, there's always those accidents that can happen. And if I was a little bit more of like a, you know, dark triad type, the dark triad being like the traits that are associated with psychopathy, like Machiavellianism, narcissism, and there's one other, I forget what it is. If I was more dark triad, I probably would have, caused more damage. But yeah, I really do think there are going to be really bad social consequences if we don't let young boys kind of express those energies. Duncan Cooper, you just had a kid. Congratulations, man. Duncan says, I find myself projecting almost exclusively masculine activities for his future. Dude, I'm the same way. I don't have a kid yet, but I really, really want to have a kid. And I'm getting like really kind of excited about that, hopefully, and really eager for that. And I'm the same dude. My kind of mental imagination of having a kid, I'm sure like, reality sets in and, things are going to be very different. But my idealized vision of having a kid, especially if I have a son, I'm exactly the same. I just imagine like doing like all the coolest, most badass kind of manly shit with him. Honestly, I honestly kind of feel like if I have a son who is a bit, rambunctious and looks like he probably would have, problems in school, I'm feeling more and more like I would just pull him from school and do like a kind of homeschooling, or I guess they call it unschooling thing. Like I honestly think that you could probably raise a child very, very well and bring them up to perfectly kind of educated, smart, well balanced person by just basically ignoring the school system altogether and just doing things with them that are productive and constructive and interesting and stimulating and cool. So yeah, like how badass would it be? This is what my mind kind of imagines. It's like if I had a son, basically we just like we go camping all the time, and I teach him how to fight, I teach him how to build shit, and we just do all of that stuff pretty much full time. I kind of I train him to do cool stuff and fun stuff, but that's also useful for the household, and that like helps the family do the things it needs to do anyway. So in that sense, it's kind of like sustainable and productive. Um, and yeah, like I kind of really wonder if you could just do that until they're 18, and then when like think about it this way: to do anything interesting or difficult, you have to develop all of the basic faculties that are taught in school. Like, you know, wouldn't you just learn math kind of as you go? Like once he's at the age where he's able to, mentally do the cognitive tasks of adding and subtracting and multiplying or whatever, like I could just basically teach him how to do those things on the fly as we're doing other things. So it's like if we're planning some like big like camping trip or hunting trip or something like that, in the planning, for instance, you're going to have to like, look at how much things cost and how much money you have. And these types of basic life activities require to do them well. It requires learning the basic tasks you get in school. So couldn't you just kind of do it on the fly as you go? That I really feel like you could. Um, again, this is my idealized dream vision of how to raise a child, especially a son. I'm not like, I mean, I would love to figure it out. I hope there's a way to do this. But I'm also like, I understand that, life is hard and reality sets in and you can't always do things how you want. So who knows how it'll work out. So Duncan, I'd be curious to hear from you. Are you like, how do you plan on doing it? Like, what do you plan on doing concretely in terms of like institutions and kind of like um, organizing your son's time over the next 10 years or whatever? Because one of the simple problems with like school is just it takes so much time, right? Like you have to spend most of the day there, and then at home you have to do homework and stuff like that. So it's like, um, yeah. Oh, another thing is I feel like young kids are mentally destroyed by the social pressures. Honestly, I think it's just that kind of scares me more than anything. Like I want my kids to have a very strong kind of independent mind and not be so sensitive to what people think and not be so kind of conditioned by like what the cool kids in fucking second grade are doing. Like, um, so yeah, many thoughts there. Be curious to hear what you all think about that, or if there are any other questions or comments. Oh, see you later, Rob. Thanks for hanging out. Um, Duncan wants to know if my wife makes okay money, or if she's more or less dependent on me in a long-term major way. It's a good question. A bit of a difficult question because what I would say is she's quite smart and she's quite able and competent and productive. She's never had any problem finding work or sustaining it. So I would say she's potentially perfectly able. And if money became a problem, I fully expect and trust that she would, get a good paying job that she'd be able to and willing and would do it. So I don't think there's any problem on that front. So that's part of the question. Like that's a partial yes. Um, that if need be, she's more than able and willing and could and would basically would be able to get a good job and hold it and all of that. So I'm not worried about that. That's one thing I would say. The second part of the question is, or the second part of the answer is, um, historically, we've been married for 7 years, and historically, I have been the breadwinner, and I'm happy to do that. I very much kind of am comfortable with that kind of traditional like gender role. I kind of like the idea that um, my wife shouldn't feel too much economic pressure, and so historically, yeah, I have been the breadwinner, and I'd like to keep it that way if possible. I will kind of aspire to that, especially because we want to have kids, and if she's going to have a baby, I mean, my mom didn't work very much. She kind of stayed home with kids, and I don't know. I have something of an emotional attachment to that. I guess like I do feel like if obviously if Ariel wanted to work, I totally support her. If she wanted to have a full time serious job, I totally support her. That'd be fine. I wouldn't be against it. But frankly, I think like most people, if they don't have to work, they'd rather not, right? Like you'd rather just hang around the house and hang with kids and you know do life that way. I think most people, if they had the opportunity, would take that, and I think that's perfectly fine. Um, so yeah, that's probably how I would describe her uh, attitude towards it. She does do a lot of writing, and she's getting more into um, journalism. Actually, like she recently published some articles that were paid actually, and so she's always kind of doing interesting, productive things that bring in some money. But I kind of think that would be the ideal. Like I would love for her to just be able to stay home with the kids and do her intellectual work, like writing or whatever it might be, to her heart's content. And if that brings in some money and she builds that up, that'd be great. But if it doesn't, that's okay too. Um, I would love for that to be the case. That sounds like an ideal dream that I'm kind of bringing in enough that she can do that. It's not necessarily going to be possible. Our future is still kind of open. Not quite sure how things are going to pan out. So it's definitely conceivable that at some point she'll have to work a full time job, or at least like a kind of more serious, aggressive type of like part time or like freelance or in a remote type of work. Um, so yeah, the future is still open. So that's my answer to that question. I'm trying to think if I'm leaving anything out. I'm not trying to be cagey. I'm just never actually. No one's ever asked me that before exactly, so I haven't thought it through explicitly. Obviously, I've thought it through a lot, but I haven't thought it through explicitly or put it into words. I'm also trying to make sure that I'm, being charitable to my wife. Uh, we don't. I don't feel any anxiety about this. Frankly, I think we're good on this. We have good shared understanding, and but I guess the short answer is I don't know exactly how the division of labor is going to work out in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. We'll see. What I would love to hear more about your situation. How do you do it, or what's going on with you? Duncan says we live in the country, but there's a hippie Montessori school. I went to Montessori school that he'll go to through eighth grade. Oh, Montessori through eighth grade. I went to like a Montessori preschool. That's it. Um, then yeah, God knows he'll be a professional woodworker slash crypto trader by then. Nice. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, Montessori school, I think. Um, Parker says +1 on teaching your kid how to build and fix things. Uh, Caleb says that workshop classes are rare. They're getting defunded. Um, a few kids could get credit for fixing broken desks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to revolutionize that sort of thing. Like, because look, the reality is like practical tasks, practical trades, construction, electricity, all kinds of stuff like that are extremely valuable and useful and desirable. And yeah, I mean, it's a real shame how kind of stigmatized they are in the kind of cultural upbringing of young men in particular. But I think the one way you could innovate on that substantially is through kind of radical experimental kind of community projects, which I still remain quite interested in. In some sense, I guess I'm embarked on one as we speak. Um, like, let's say my wife and I bought like a big ass house, somewhere cheap. You know, I'm sure there's some like smart, interesting person kind of in my ecosystem who's a really good carpenter or something like that, and who is really smart and blogs a lot, or writes like eccentric things or whatever. So like maybe has no pathway to any kind of like stable or influential kind of intellectual life, but is interesting and cool and smart, and is really able to do things like carpentry and wants to have like a more kind of intellectual lifestyle also, and currently can't have it. Okay, then come that person could come live with us. They could own a stake in the house or something like that, so we all have equity in the house, and they could just basically do all the construction tasks that need to be done around the house. They could build stuff, fix stuff, and also get to like be a part of, like, live with other intelligent people working on interesting, significant, hopefully intellectual projects, and be part of like a higher brow intellectual culture, which they currently have like literally no access to, simply because our culture is like so unbalanced and in this way. So I still like to think very much about those sorts of creative, like social engineering projects. I think there's like a lot of opportunity for them. And I mean, this kind of goes back to the idea of patchwork. Like, this is why I'm interested in the notion of the patchwork, and thinking about politics as essentially the construction of patches. And I think one of the reasons this is useful is because I actually think that if you did things this way and you could figure it out, you would actually, your group would be like more successful. It'd be like more economically successful and also politically stable. Like, over time, if everyone tried to do these types of experiments, you would converge on what works. And I genuinely believe that a kind of more equitable distribution of attention and value, and both like cultural value that we assign to things, but also economic value, that I do think that actually a more equitable and well-rounded way of producing cultural and economic value, such as the one I'm describing in this type of coherent, tight knit, well balanced community structure, that if you could figure that out, if you could engineer it correctly, it would be way more successful in every way. And it would start to beat out like people who participate in normal society. And in this way, I think you could really imagine a kind of long-term trajectory to like overthrowing currently existing institutions through this type of approach. And I'm out here in Albuquerque living with Jeffrey and Diana and my wife, and kind of building this like collaborative thing. In some sense, I guess I'm actually embarked on this type of experiment, and something like bringing on, construction workers as a part of this type of experimental intellectualized, production commune. Uh, I think is a possible next step. I don't know. Caleb asks, "What's a good shit test for a healthy co-op style patch that you're describing? I've seen a few at friends' colleges that just became trash houses." Yeah, that is the common failure mode, and that's the problem. So, what's a good shit test? That's a great question. I don't think it would be too hard to um, essentially filter out that type of problem just by doing like basic entrance surveys, right? You could just have some basic criteria that give you a pretty good probability that the people you're bringing in are not going to be problems or cause these types of problems. I don't think that'd be too hard to do, honestly. Tim asks, "Did I see the DSA clips?" Yeah, I saw those. They're pretty funny. They took me back to the Occupy days. I've been through all of that. I've lived, I've done it, I've lived it. Yeah. So yeah, all of that stuff is very familiar to me. It is pretty funny. It's funny seeing like normal people on the internet be exposed to it, because like that was my life for many years, like in the Occupy years, from like 2011 to 2013 or so. That was the jazz hands, point of privilege, all that stuff. I did all of it. It's fun. It is funny though, in retrospect. Parker asks, "Do I have a opinion on Dave Harris's Deleuze series or other secondary source recommendations?" I have not seen them, but I will look them up. I'm actually, as we speak, in the phase of my Deleuze book project where I'm kind of reviewing secondary literature and collecting citations and kind of going over stuff I've already read and kind of bringing it in. But I'm also kind of looking out for new stuff also, just to catch up. And the book is not going to pretend even to provide any kind of thorough literature review, but it will engage with some of the literature. So I appreciate the tip. I will check out Dave Harris's Deleuze series. Oh, Caleb Miller is a proud member of the DSA Inside Voice Caucus. Yeah, what's funny is actually when I saw the clip that everyone was sharing, you know, the point about noise is actually not that unreasonable. Specifically, like if people in the audience are talking a lot, it is kind of just annoying, right? Even if you don't have sound sensitivity issues, So it's not like a crazy thing just to say, hey, everyone in the audience, be a little more quiet, stay focused, and uh, I actually didn't think that one was that crazy, but maybe that's because I was socialized into this stuff and did it for a while. In the normal world, says Tim, the speaker says, "Shut the fuck up." Yeah, maybe. All right, folks, it's 12 o'clock. So that was fun. I think we'll just make these an hour. I think that was a good length, but I'm glad that 5 or 6 of you hung out. Really good to talk with you. In the future, come back. And I would also love to learn more about you folks. It was cool to kind of learn about some of you here. In the future, we can talk about anything you want. And yeah, so bring whatever questions you have or whatever comments or conversation starters you want to bring. And yeah, it's good getting to know you all a little better. So I think we should wrap it up. Let me know if you thought that was cool or if you have any comments, if you thought it was lame, whatever. If you think it's worth doing or not worth doing. If you have any input, definitely let me know. Very open to hearing, but I thought that was fun. And so at least for now, we'll do another one at least next month for sure. And I'll kind of keep an open mind about whether or not this sort of thing is fun for people or worthwhile for people. So Kim says very enjoyable. Great, glad to hear it. All right, so a warm goodbye to Duncan Cooper, to Tim, to Caleb Miller, to Parker Roove, if I'm pronouncing that right, to Nothing, and anyone else who I might be forgetting. Thanks for hanging out, and leave a reply underneath this on Patreon, or shoot me an email or DM me or whatever if you want to follow up on any of this stuff. Big thanks to you all as my patrons. Really grateful to have you guys. Grateful for your interest, and also just to have you as interlocutors and people to hang out with and talk with. Yeah, I'm very grateful. So thanks for your support. I couldn't be doing everything I'm doing without you. So yeah, huge thanks, and have a good rest of your day. I will see you on the interwebs. Take it easy, folks. Bye bye.